Hi, I'm James and I study a Masters in Developmental Psychology. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today, as well as psychology in general, what a psychology degree involves and what you can do with it afterwards. So one of the things that we're interested in developmental psychology is how children understand the intentions of others. So do children understand what people mean to do, the intentions behind their actions? So this is kind of typical of a problem that we look at in psychology, because it's something that we all do. You do it and I do it. We read the intentions of other people. We know what other people are going to do. But you've probably never thought about it before because you've been doing it for so long, it just becomes natural. So it's a good example of the sort of thing that we look at because we are looking at the processes that go on in our minds and that affect how we behave and the decisions we make and that sort of stuff. But they do have to develop. We're not born with these skills. So how do they develop? Where do they come from? And does it work the same for everybody? Are really important questions, and they are typical sort of developmental psychology and just general psychology questions. So one of the first ways that we looked at how children use sort of social information is we've got this experiment called the visual cliff, and you'll see we've got the checkerboard pattern, and that checkerboard pattern stops. Now it's actually just a glass table, so the child can safely go from one end to the other with no problems, but to them it looks like the edge of a cliff. It looks like it drops off. And what we wanted to know was, do they use information from other people to make decisions about whether they keep crawling or whether they stop at that edge of the cliff where it looks like they might fall off. So we can put a toy at the end of that table, and we can have an adult as well. And children will, about the age of 12 months, start to use the information that they're getting from an adult that we put at the end of the table. If parent is at the end of the table and they're encouraging the child to keep going, they'll keep going. If they look worried, the child will stop. So they can use that information. They can look at somebody and see, what is it that they're thinking and how does that apply to me and what should I be doing? Now, as the child gets older and they get more experienced in the world and maybe going up and down stairs and things like that, they will make the judgment for themselves. So there does come a point where it just sort of stops. But from 12 months on, up until a couple of years of age, they will do that. But it actually shows us that from about a year old, they can read the information that they're getting from an adult and actually use that to manage their own behaviour, which is a really important thing to know. And then we want to know, how early does this sort of thing start to develop? And one of the big problems that we have in developmental research is that with a really young child, there's not a lot they can do, right? They may be not moving around very freely yet. They're not talking. We can't interview them. We can't ask them questions, that sort of stuff. What we can do is we can put an eye tracker on them. We can put a little camera on their head that tracks where their eyeballs are, or we can just observe them and see if they're turning their head and what they're looking at. And what we've done in the past is we've done research studies with really young children where they've got these objects and they see a hand, and we want to see what the child will look at. And what we find is that if an adult reaches for one of the objects but then says, oops, the child seems to know which object they were trying to reach for. So we usually find that the child will look at for longer the object that the adult is trying to reach for. And if the adult reaches for one object and says, oops, the child will look longer at the other object. So if they reach for the teddy bear and then say, oops, the child will actually look at the ball longer because the child knows they've said oops, they actually want the ball, they don't want the teddy bear. And we found that behaviour from 6 months old. And an infant's not doing very much at 6 months, but they've somehow got this information, they've somehow got these abilities that are starting to develop. So actually, from really young, they are starting to develop these skills, which is really a useful thing to know. Another key piece of research is about trust, and it's about who we trust information from. You know, we all have people that we go to if we've got a particular problem. You know, if we've got a problem with our phone or a problem with the computer, we all know somebody that's good with technology, and that's the person that we'll go to if we've got those sorts of problems. And we've got people that we wouldn't go to with that stuff, right? Because they're not as good with that stuff. We want to know how soon that develops. So we can set up these scenarios. We can have these adults in a sort of videotape scenario that are actors, and we can have them have a conversation about a particular topic and answer questions about a particular topic. And we might have the adult in the blue t-shirt always get the answer wrong, and the adult in the red t-shirt always get the answer right. And then we can ask the child, who would you ask? Or we can set up a scenario where they actually have to ask an adult, and we see which one they ask. And what we find is that at about the age of 3 or 4, they will tend to go for the person that gets the right answers. So they will be able to track somebody's history if they got the right answer or the wrong answer. They might have some difficulties working out why somebody got the right answer or the wrong answer, but they can sort of track that from the age of 3 or 4, which again is really young. You know, children are only just starting school at the age of 4, so they've sort of got very basic abilities, but actually they can do more than you might think. They're aware of more than you might think. And that's why developmental psychology is such an important discipline, because we can dig into those sorts of issues. Another reason that this is a really important thing to look at is that it doesn't happen like this for every child. We've been talking about the typical child. The typical child will be able to look at the signals that they're getting from an adult in the visual cliff experiment at about 12 months. They'll be able to turn their head to look at what object they think the adult is going for at about 6 months. At about 3 or 4, they'll be able to track people's history of getting right answers, wrong answers. Not all children develop typically. And for example, if somebody struggles with those tasks, let's say the task that we just looked at with tracking the right and wrong answers, if they struggle with that at about the ages of 5 or 6, that can be a clue that maybe they are having problems, and it could be a clue that they might have some issues going on like autistic spectrum disorder or other developmental issues. So that's another thing that we look at in developmental psychology, and also in psychology as a whole. We look at a range of sort of differences from typical development and why they happen, and what we can do to support the people that are affected by those. And that's really important in developmental psychology. We're looking at children who don't develop typically, and actually what support do they need to be successful, and that can lead to a range of different sort of careers and opportunities. So why study a degree in psychology? Let's think about it a bit more generally. I've talked to you about developmental because that's my area, but there's lots of things you can do, and there's lots of different areas within psychology. So some of the sorts of things that you will learn, I've got up on the screen. We look at lots of things to do with behaviour. That can have applications in the medical field, for businesses, in sports, all of those sorts of things. We look at the environment. You know, that could be the physical environment of a building that we're in, that could be the wider environment of air quality and things like that, and what impact does it have on our well-being. One thing that we also look at is sort of statistics and data science, so that is a big sort of area of a psychology degree, because we need to be able to gather some evidence, do experiments and gather some evidence, so you will learn how to put that together and how to sort of make predictions and show findings about human behaviour, which is a really useful skill to have. All of these issues that we cover are things that you would look at on a psychology degree programme here at the University of Kent, but they're also typical of what sort of things you will do in any psychology degree that you would study at a different university. What careers can psychology lead you to? So there's the clinical jobs, which is things like being a clinical psychologist, an educational psychologist, so diagnosing people. You can also go into academia, you can do behavioural research, that sort of stuff, counselling, but there's a wide range of other jobs as well that aren't sort of psychology based. I would say that any people job, any job where you want to work with people that's to do with helping people or communicating effectively with people, that is a job that a psychology degree would help you with. Between my first degree in psychology and coming back to do my master's in developmental psychology, I've actually spent quite a long time as a teacher, and that really I found useful, the skills that I'd got from my psychology degree, not just because of the subject knowledge, but actually it made it really a lot easier for me to understand people and how they learn and how to develop resources that are specific to them and how to make that a better experience. So any job where you're working with people is a psychology job, whether that's teaching, whether that's social work, youth work, probation work, really wide range of careers and applications that you can use a psychology degree for. Specific to my program, which is developmental psychology, we look at how our past experiences affect us as adults, how to research infants, because it's really difficult. Research is done on newborn infants that are hours old, and newborn infants can't really do anything. So how do we get information out of them is something that's really important, and also gives you an understanding of the data science and how to analyse those results. So I hope that's been useful and it's helped you get a good understanding of psychology, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.